to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast. This podcast is all about equipping, encouraging, and inspiring youth pastors weekly with topics that are brought to the table by youth pastors from all over the world. And now, here's your host for this week, David Pruitt.
Well, hello and welcome to the podcast. If this is your first time, we want to encourage you to check out our website, studentministryconversations.org, where you can find all of our previous episodes, our show notes, our blog articles, and much more. We are closing in on 12,000 listeners, and that only happens because of you guys. And so we are absolutely thrilled that you guys continue to check us out. And so let's dive right in to today's episode. So today I get the incredible honor of sitting down with Kevin Libick, who is the student pastor at Christ Chapel in Fort Worth, Texas. Hey man, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, it's great to be with you, David. So I'm a student pastor at Christ Chapel in Fort Worth, Texas. I've been there for 17 years. I've been doing student ministry for over 20 in various capacities. Currently, right now, we are a multi-site church, so I oversee our student ministry team on all of our campuses. I'm originally from Southern California, but I'm a Texan now and have been for the last 20-something years. So most of my life, technically, because I moved here in 98 to go to TCU and stuck around and great. I'm married. My wife and I have been married for 20, I guess we'll be 23 years this year. And we've got a 10-year-old son who is 10 going on 25. And I love all things barbecue. That's my relaxation, is to try new things. And I'm glad to be a part of the conversation today.
Awesome, man. I am excited. Clearly need to talk barbecue with you. I won't lie. I definitely was checking out your Facebook page and saw a rack of ribs and was like, I'm only 3 hours away from you.
Yeah.
So we might have to have an
we'll meet up.
conversation soon.
That's right.
Dude, that's awesome. And going to TCU, awesome. Great school.
Yep. Love it.
Well, cool. So I wanted to just kind of jump right in with today's conversation. So Kevin and I met through Facebook like 3 days ago. This is what I love about ministry and just the technology that we have. I was scrolling one morning as I was getting ready, and I came across your post on the DYM page, I believe. Actually, yes, because I've got the screenshot. And you posted this post, and I just found it so encouraging and so kind, and I just knew I had to reach out to you. So I just want to read it, and then we'll jump into the conversation.
Sure.
So it says this: 18 years ago, a group of elders decided that I wasn't a good youth pastor. I was broken and devastated and questioning my calling. Man, how many of us have been there? Yesterday, I got to speak at the closing session for our high school retreat. I've been at my church for almost 17 years. If you're reading this and you have been hurt by the church's unhealthy leadership, my heart goes out to you. It's not the way that Jesus wants his bride to act. Your calling is not determined by your church leadership. I'm going to repeat that. You need to hear this. Your calling is not determined by your church leadership. It's not determined by your job title. It's from Jesus. Stay faithful to the one who called you. The opinions of men can't hold up to what your Savior declares about you. What was broken in my heart has been restored by opening my heart to Jesus's tender, patient healing. My goodness. Beautiful, beautiful story and words. And obviously there is a whole story to be unpacked.
Sure,
here.
yeah,
And
totally.
So, let's just, actually, before we go into that, part of the reason why I just knew I had to reach out, as I was reading it, I told Kevin I've read that about 4 times and was just very encouraged by it. I'm someone who has gone through that before, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But as soon as I finished that post, without going into specific youth pastor pages, just in scrolling for the morning, which I really shouldn't do that, but hey, sometimes it works out. But I saw 4 other posts in a matter of about 10 minutes of youth pastors that were at their wits' end and experiencing this sense of brokenness and asking for advice and asking for prayer and saying, hey, I don't think I could do this anymore. And how do you know if you're really called, and different things like that. And it just broke my heart. And I was like, okay, God, I see you, I hear you, I'm reaching out right now. And you were so quick to say, yeah, amen. And so,
Yeah.
which I think just, really shows your heart. So, like I said, let's get into it.
Yeah.
Obviously you've got a story here. And so, if you don't mind, what led you to that place that morning to post what you posted?
Sure. Yeah. Well, in that post, I mean, obviously it struck a chord because that post really blew up in a way that I hadn't experienced before. And it's evident that, people are out there experiencing a lot of hurt. So where it came from is we have a high school retreat every year, and our high school retreat, part of it is breakout sessions. And so I was asked to lead a breakout session on, of all things, how to love your enemies. So I was in that breakout session, and I don't talk about what I'll get into. I don't talk about kind of my story in front of students too much because I don't want them to get jaded by the church. They don't need, that's not their burden to bear. But I had to share, I feel like, one of the most hurtful things that I had to go through and how God healed me from it. And so that Sunday morning, I shared with a group of high schoolers about how I'd experienced hurt from the church and been rejected from a group of elders who, after a couple of years of serving and having no indication that things were drastically wrong, which I'll get into it, I shared that with my students. And then immediately, or not immediately, but later that afternoon, was giving the final talk to a group of our high schoolers for the session. And it just struck me. Here I am sharing my story about how there was a church who thought I wasn't a good enough youth pastor. And here I am, 18 years later and still in it. And so I thought if we often think about the struggles in ministry, but there's not a whole lot of hope. It's a lot of frustration that gets talked about, but not a lot of hope. And so I'm always about hope and giving, casting a vision for a future. And so that's certainly kind of the reason why I wanted to do that day. So I'll get into a little bit of my story as a whole. So I was a high school pastor. I'd just come out of seminary. I'd been an intern and a volunteer. Had a great experience, a ton of good mentors who poured into me, invested in me. When I graduated seminary, I took a job as a youth pastor, a high school pastor at church, actually not too far from here. And 3 years were hard. The relationships were good, but the leadership was just unhealthy and expectations were unreal. And I thought that I was doing what they had asked me to do. And a long story short, we had just been doing building a new student building, and I had been carrying a heavy load for all the finish out, not necessarily doing the finish out, but a lot of the decisions or whatever. We had a big party to celebrate the opening of the building and on a Saturday. And then that Monday, I got a letter from the elders saying, hey, thanks, but these things need to change. And some of the things were as simple as better communication to parents. My teaching, my biblical teaching was kind of put into question, which I think is funny. But yeah, so it was a pretty devastating blow. I grew, there were some things that were true in that, but some things that were just not. And the church, to its credit, I will say this, they allowed me to stay until I found a new role, but it was definitely not couched or not framed in the sense of they were letting me go. So it took about 8 months for me after realizing that I wasn't going to be there. It took me 8 months to find a job. I got a lot of rejections from a lot of churches. And the church that I'm currently at I knew somebody at the church and who was in the student ministry department, said, "Hey, we're looking for a middle school pastor. Would you be interested?" And we interviewed, and that was that. And since then, I've been a middle school pastor. I've been overseeing our student ministry, um, and in various roles. And so now I get a chance to lead. A lot of my role right now is leading a team of youth pastors. So I get to provide an environment that I didn't have necessarily, which is exciting for me, and it's satisfying for me. And I get to coach up our team. And also, I love being this idea of being someone who's gone before, helping younger youth workers who are struggling, whether that's just with, I don't know how to do this, to I'm losing heart and all that. I think some of the funny thing is the church that I was at is about maybe 20, 25 minutes from our Fort Worth campus, our main campus. But we have a West campus that is literally like 5 minutes from that church. I drive by it every time I go to the West campus. And so it's just funny to me. I was in that room. I'm like, there are people from this community who said I wasn't good at working with high schoolers. And here I am, 45, almost 46, still working with high schoolers in that same city. And man, God's just blessed it. Yeah. So that's kind of my story. The hurt.
Man, that's incredible what God has done in you in the last 18 years from that.
Yeah.
Gosh. And just to think, like, you go from feeling like things are good, and all of a sudden you get a letter and find out that things are not
Mm-hmm.
what you felt they were. And oftentimes, I hear both sides of it, where it's a very sudden thing, and the
Yep.
church just decides we want to go a different direction, and you're completely blindsided by it.
Mm-hmm.
And others where they constantly beat you down. That was my experience. And it didn't matter how much you did. At the end of the day, it was never going to be, I hate to use the word good enough, because that seems like such a low bar, but it was just, it was like, it didn't matter how many people were accepting Christ. It didn't matter how many people were coming, unless we're competing with, whatever the biggest town
Yeah.
or biggest church in town is, then we're not doing enough. And
Yeah.
it's one of those things where it's like, we got to take the competition mindset out, and that's a whole nother
Mm-hmm.
episode.
Yeah.
We've
For
got those
sure.
episodes on, but just to go from a place like that. And so you said that you had experienced some rejection for a bit in
Yeah.
that season too. So essentially at this point, you've just been blindsided
Mm-hmm.
and rejected, and then as you're interviewing, there's more rejection. What was
Yeah.
the if you can remember back that far, what was the feeling for you, for your wife?
Yeah. It was. It was hard. We interviewed. Literally all over the country.
Wow.
And the world. We interviewed for a church in England
Whoa.
that we thought was going to be pretty cool, and we just kept getting a lot of no's. And I remember just questioning my calling, questioning who I was, questioning if I was any good. All the affirmation that I'd received from mentors and other people who had poured into me, it was just like, is this even going to happen?
Mm.
I don't know the exact number, but it was probably in the 40s or 50s in terms of just churches that I applied to that I didn't. And again, this is back in the day. This is way before a lot of church, you know, convenient church websites for searching for. So it was a slog for sure. And I remember one time we were my wife and I were on just a weekend trip with some friends of ours, and a church that I had been candidating for went up to Pittsburgh, had I thought a great experience, and was excited about it. And we were on the trip when I got the call that they were going in a different direction. And that was probably, I feel like, the lowest for me.
You start to get excited.
Yeah.
right? You start to see yourself, and you try really hard not to dream in those situations. Um, but it's hard not to, right?
Yeah.
Like, especially when you've already had all these other interviews and stuff like that. And you're like, this is the one,
Hmm.
and that's the whole other part of ministry that I don't think it's talked about a lot. We believe, obviously, God calls us and we want to serve wherever God will take us, whether that's here or in another country or whatever the case might be. But we often don't talk about, like, is the church a good fit for us?
Hmm.
And I think that's part of why so many youth pastors are struggling and hurting is, you'll hear a church say, man, for some reason, it just doesn't seem like it's working. And we begin to immediately, I mean, there's no way to not take that personally. We
Yep.
put so much of our heart and passion and care into it. There's no way that you
Yeah.
can't. But at the same time, it's a situation where you're giving everything you have to this ministry, and all of a sudden they're telling you you're not good enough. And
Hmm.
the question is I feel like it's never really said, at least in my conversations with people who have had those conversations with their churches, is it's never, again, I can't say never, but oftentimes they neglect to say whether or not you're really called to this place for this
Yeah.
long. And and the other side of it too is that God often calls us in seasons.
Hmm.
And so I belong to the Methodist denomination. I grew up Baptist, but one thing, historically about the Methodist Church is that they never kept a pastor in a place for more than 2 years, because they realized that, very much in kind of a missionary perspective, that God tends to call people for a season, and then he calls other people for another season. And so that's part of the equation
Yeah.
and all of that. And so there's a lot of different factors that go into it, but oftentimes it's just, you're not good enough, and you're left trying to pick up the pieces, like, well, what did I do wrong? How did I do it
Hmm.
wrong? Like, what did I say wrong, or whatever else like that? And oftentimes it has nothing to do with your preaching style. It
Hmm.
has nothing. But at the end of the day, you can't just fire somebody for nothing. And
Yeah.
so oftentimes what ends up happening, and this is the unfortunate downside of it all, is when you have no reason to fire somebody, they begin to character assassinate, in a sense. They
Hmm.
start to look at your character, they start to look at your preaching style and go, well, if you were a little bit more charismatic, if you were a little bit more dynamic, if you were a little bit more this, if you attracted more popular kids, then we'd have more kids coming,
Yeah.
but you tend to attract the nerdy kids, and we don't really want that. Or one thing I was told in a previous church, we had grown the youth ministry to from, like, I don't know, 10, 15 to 120, to 130 at the most.
Mm.
But a lot of them were skater kids and potheads, and,
Yeah.
not exactly one that a upper middle class church expects to see. And they were like, you're bringing in, I mean, we were literally told, they're like, you're bringing in hoodlums. And we're like, uh-huh.
Hmm.
And like, and, well, like, praise God, God is doing something amazing in these guys, and they're accepting Jesus, and they're serving inside our youth ministry. Like, what's the problem? And they're like, well, they're kind of rough. And I was like, again, tell me what the problem is. And it was a church that wanted upper middle class kids who
Yeah.
got good grades and never got in trouble, and that was not who God had called us to shepherd
Yeah.
in that situation. And we left in a great um, place, but at the same time, it was a struggle.
Yeah.
And so there were times where I was like, well, you need to reach out to these other kids. And we're like, no, we're going to reach out to who God is calling us to reach out to. But that caused some struggle, and
Yep.
certainly moments where we were questioning, like, are we doing it wrong? Like, I don't like, not, I don't think I ever questioned whether or not we should be reaching who we have. But at the same time, is, you know, how can we reach both sides of it and help them to see that just because they are rougher kids doesn't mean that they don't belong in the same conversation and in the same place, and they should be just as welcome in God's church as anybody else, whether their parents are here giving money or not,
Yeah.
which is the real problem, but we don't
Yeah.
say that out loud.
Yeah. No. But it
So
is. It. I mean, it is. I think there's a factor where churches don't know what they're looking for with youth pastors, or they're
mhm,
not honest with themselves about what they're looking for. They have unrealistic expectations about what hiring one person can do for the entire church.
Mhm.
Uh, and you have a mostly young um, men and women who are going into ministry who don't know their gift sets. They don't know fully.
Mhm.
They just want to be faithful, and they don't know. And so the pieces that development usually isn't there. There's not the patience to develop somebody
Mhm.
into the leader that they want them to be. And that's just it's unfortunate because those unstated expectations are really what kill um, most youth pastors in tough situations.
Totally agree. So we've talked a lot about the hurt,
Yeah.
but the big thing, and we could talk easily for hours about that conversation. But I think, hopefully we hit enough to help you resonate and understand where we're coming from, and what we've experienced. And I've talked a little bit more about my own personal story and other episodes. You guys can go watch those. But I want to move on to the hope element, and I think
Mm,
you're absolutely right. There's so much frustration and venting, and that's super healthy.
yeah.
We have to talk.
Yeah.
We need to be able to bounce those things, get those things off our heart, off our chest, and be able to find healthy avenues to deal with those frustrations and those struggles. um but I love what you said, that there needs to be an element of hope. And I'm very encouraged by your position, even. There are not, I mean, obviously the bigger churches do a great job with it, with the multi sites and different things like that. But there's not a lot of churches that are investing in youth ministry teams.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of them, it's one person, one vision, and they're trying to build a good volunteer base around them. And if that's your church, that's perfectly okay. But I love that you have a team where you get to pour into youth pastors and use that incredible 20 years of experience that you have, and the hurts and the different things that you've seen, the good things, the bad things, the ugly things, at times too,
Yeah.
to be able to have those, the ability to pour into. It reminds me a lot of, my good friend, who's actually been on the podcast before, Doug Franklin, over in Wheaton, Illinois. I almost said
Yeah.
Chicago.
We're Lear Trex. Doug's great.
Oh, Doug.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Doug.
Yeah.
Yeah. Doug. Yeah.
Doug is, he's been on this podcast. He's one of my favorite people on the planet. I told him one day, when God moved me away from full-time youth ministry, I want to work for him,
Yeah.
because I just love the model of pouring into other youth pastors. That's the
Hmm.
only other direction I see myself going in. I'm a worship pastor too, but I can lead worship and help other youth pastors. And
Totally.
so let's talk about that hope element. What is, I guess, to kind of define it, what does the idea of, like, kind of this hope after hurt, or hope in the midst of hurt, what does that mean to you in your
Yeah.
position?
So one, I think framing for me, the idea of calling is so important for me. Calling, I feel like, is an anchor when the seas around you are going crazy. And when you hold on to that idea that God led me here, He called me here, that everything He says is true about His character, I can rely on. Um, and so when I'm looking at hiring people for my team, calling is one of the biggest factors to that. Um, but for me, as I was going through this time, going back to Scripture, um, I started to realize that I was in good company. That the pattern of uh, Scripture is that if you're going to live a life of calling, a unique calling of vocational ministry, um, chances are you're going to experience hardship. And and so my expectation that I was going to be somewhere, and experience tons of growth and thriving and all that kind of stuff is just, man, you look at Hebrews chapter 11 and it talks about all the people that went ahead of us and what they experienced. And so when not that you want to welcome criticism, or, well, you don't welcome those, you don't invite those, you certainly look for ways to improve yourself and grow. But when it happens, okay, I'm in good company. I talk to people on my team, whenever they're struggling, I go, well, okay, well, let's look at what Jesus experienced. Jesus said, foxes have dens, birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay. Okay, well, if that's what Christ experienced in his effort to bring the message of the gospel, then my expectations shouldn't exceed that. And you look at the Old Testament prophets, all that kind of stuff. And so for me, that was a reframing of what am I expecting out of this life of calling? And it stinks. I mean, you go through to be a youth pastor, you go through seasons where all your friends have way more disposable income than you, way more stability in that area. But the calling is what compels me to keep going. And so to have that calling for me is a huge part of anchoring me through those storms. And I've experienced storms, even since I've been at my current church. It's not all been easy. It's not all been fun. And there have been times where I've wrestled with even being here, but the calling piece has been huge. The a, a thing that happened to me is that was really crucial to my healing was about a year and a half into my current church. So I'd been gone for about a year and a half from my old church. And God really started to reveal to me my bitterness and my own frustration towards that church. And God challenged me. He said, "You need to let go of that." And I didn't. I didn't want to. It felt good to hold on to that, but it was something that God was continually pushing me to. That I'm not going to grow as a leader. I'm not going to continue to be effective as a pastor unless I get rid of that bitterness. And so I felt like for me, one of the things that I needed to do was I needed to um, go to the elder board, the ones that sent me that letter, and meet with them. Which not everybody has a way not everybody has that opportunity afforded to them. But God was like, you need to go talk to them, and so I went to them, and it was very clear from before the meeting that God was asking me not to seek, not to get any sort of resolution from them, that I had to let go any sort of expectations that I was going to express my hurt or my pain or my struggle, and that they were going to somehow repent, which is what I wanted. I wanted to be able to point out, here's how you did me wrong, and here's what I expected, and some sort of restoration in that sense. I had to let go of any sort of expectation, and so I went to the elders, and I said, I need your forgiveness for the bitterness that I've had against you. Now, talk about humbling, and talk about in a system of justice. That's not what justice is. We want justice for the people that hurt us, but I needed to be released from that bitterness, and the only way that I felt like God was saying is you needed to let them free of that. And so I said, will you please forgive me that for my bitterness? And I remember one elder said, well, we didn't know that there was anything wrong. We didn't know that. I'm like, okay, yeah, you guys don't get it. That's okay. But releasing them of the expectation that they were going to be something different than they were was really, really freeing for me. And so that was a huge moment for me of moving towards restoration, is saying, God, I have to let go of this bitterness, or it's going to stay with me and it's going to hurt me and my family for a long time. And another thing is that I had to just continually pray for blessing on that church. Like I said, I drive by it all the time, and I could choose to give it the finger as I'm driving by the highway, or I can choose to pray blessings on it. And so bless those who curse you. Mm-hmm. Taking Jesus's words into a serious thing is important for me.
Man, that's beautiful. No better word. I am very encouraged by that. Just to share a little bit, I am now at 6 months in my current church, and man, it's been absolutely a breath of fresh air. It's been incredible
Hmm.
for my family. I am um, reunited. So the church I told you about, where I was serving with a. I don't think I went into the detail, but I was serving with a really good friend there. We became friends through that, and I ended up getting in on. As an intern actually
Mm.
originally, and I was going to be helping out with worship and different things like that, and it very quickly became more of like an associate pastor role, or associate youth pastor, and really co-youth pastor kind of situation. And when I got married, and then the next day we took on a different church. And one of the things we always joked and said we would never be senior pastors, but if we did, we had to call each other if we ever needed a youth pastor. And so he became a senior pastor in
Mm.
this church, and I knew the guy who was their youth pastor here, and we were friends. And ironically, his wife was one of our students back in Canyon, and just real cool, real cool. I mean, very full circle thing. And so I called him to congratulate him on becoming senior pastor and all the hard work he put into it. And a few weeks later, he found out that he was going to be needing a youth pastor, and he knew I was in a place where I needed. It was time. God was
Yeah.
opening the door, and so funny thing is, we were actually both just looking at. I interviewed with like 5 other churches, and one of those, actually 2 of those, he set up. And then all of a sudden, I get a phone call, and he said, "Hey, so I've been trying so hard to help you get a job, and I never asked the question, what would it take to get you here?" And I said, "The fact that you're asking me." And he was just like, "Okay." I was like, "Let's talk," and we,
Mm.
had an amazing conversation with the leadership here, and they answered, gosh, and I was in a deeply, deeply hurt place going into that interview. I was hypercritical,
Yeah.
um, because I felt like I couldn't move my family into
Yeah.
another church like that. I just couldn't do it. And the churches were so similar in the way that they govern, and it was, well, the funny thing is, it was 40 minutes away from the church I was currently in, and the 2 churches clash, or not the churches, the towns. They're
Mm.
major bitter rivals. And so I've spent 10 years in Snyder hearing about how people in Sweetwater were horrible and mean, and all kinds of other stuff. And I was like, there's no way I can serve in a church like that. And that is not what I experienced.
Yeah.
That interview, people were nothing but kind and sweet and loving. And as I shared my story, I mean, at one point, one of the leaders literally got out of her chair and came and just put her hand on my shoulder and started praying. And
Mm.
I was just like, whoa, this is different. This is different than I've experienced in a long, long time. And so, anyway, it was just a very full circle moment after, gosh, 10 years. God brought us back together, and now I have the incredible honor of serving him, and
Mm.
being his youth and worship pastor, and just incredible, incredible thing that God has been able to do through that. But one of the things that I am in that process of
Hmm.
dealing with the bitterness and the hurt. And
Yeah.
but what I found myself, more than even really feeling bitter, I feel guilty,
Mm.
which is really ironic, because I am a big, um, one of my core sermons is that guilt is not in the Bible, and that's not what God wants you to feel. But yet I feel so much guilt, and I began to try to root it out. I'm in counseling, and just trying to get down to the root of it. What I realize is that I feel guilty because for the first time in 10 years, I feel happy.
Hmm.
And for the first time in 10 years, like, I feel like I'm finally in a good place, and I'm not questioning things. And,
Yeah.
and I feel really guilty because I know that there are a lot of people who are hurting, and I know there's a lot of people who are struggling, and I know that there's a
Yeah.
lot of people in that church right now that are struggling, and that breaks my heart for them, and it breaks my heart for the staff there. And and so I'm trying to reconcile, like, it's okay to be where God called you to be, and it's
Yeah.
okay to be happy, but how do I deal with with the guilt of all of that, and certainly bitterness too. And so just hearing your story and being able to like actually have that conversation with them. And but the biggest thing that I took away from that is you saying releasing yourself from the expectations of them being who they are not.
Yeah.
And that's huge, because that's why I left.
Yeah.
Because the leadership, when I look at the biblical standards and qualifications of what a leader in a church should be, and I'm not talking just paid staff, I'm talking all over your deacons, your elders, all
Yep.
of these. There are qualifications to being in leadership, and I had a core 3 things, and none of those 3 things were being met. And I had a conversation with my current senior pastor, and he asked me a very honest and really intelligent question. He said, if you were not on a paid staff position, would you attend your church? And it was an instant gut check, no.
Yeah.
And then he said, why? And I was like, because the leaders don't do these 3 things, and I don't want to bash them, because that's not what
Yep.
I'm here to do. That's not what this conversation's about. But they weren't meeting those things, and he was like, you already know.
Yeah.
You
You
already
already
know
know
what
the
God's
answer.
calling you to do. And so I'm not a crier. I cried for an hour after that conversation.
Yeah.
I realized it was the first time I was like, it's okay to leave. Like, it's
Yeah.
okay. Like, but I had this moment, and this was the I guess the scariest part in all of it was, I was so filled with this like insecurity, and um, truly believed, like, what if everything they've said about me is right?
Mm-hmm.
And if they're correct and I really am the problem, where do I go from there? How do I fix it? How do I in good conscience go to another church if I'm a problem?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, is it even responsible for me to be interviewing, or should I take some time to correct myself? And God very quickly showed me that was not true. I had, like I said, I had 5 interviews lined up right away. Every single one of them offered, which was really kind and very sweet. But
Yeah.
we knew this is where, so I guess 6 churches, and that was in a span of a month.
Mm.
Um, and so, um, I guess there was so much more hope out there that I couldn't see, because I was so busy spinning my wheels in an unhealthy environment, believing I can fix it. And
Mm-hmm.
not me, obviously, but like God can use me, and we can, like, I can't leave this church broken. I can't do it. And
Yeah.
I think that's where so many student pastors are struggling, is because it's like we sort of have this. I joke with our teenagers, especially our girls, and say, we do so much or like, y'all do so much missionary dating. Like,
Yeah.
it's
You
okay,
think?
I'll fix them, and I'll let them know about Jesus, and they're gonna be better, and it's gonna be okay. And I'm like, yeah, but they're not on your level. They're not, and it's hard to hear that, but at the end of the day, like, I was spinning my wheels, not being the right person for them not being the right church fit for my family, and we were doing more damage than good.
Yeah.
And so being able to release the expectations of what I believed the church should have been, which is true, it's biblically based, but at the same time, they couldn't currently live up to that
Yeah.
expectation without doing the hard work to fix the structure of leadership there. And I pray blessings
Yeah.
that it's such a the funny thing is, it's such an easy change.
Mm-hmm.
And if they take the Bible seriously, that church will be so healthy, and I cannot wait to see the good things God's going to do in them. And so, gosh, it's so good.
Yeah. And it's well, and it's. I think I think one of the hardest parts of discernment when you're in that space of can I fix this, right? Is there is both things can be true. Sticking it out and doing the hard thing um, is is real. There's blessing on
Yeah.
the other side. Faithfulness is good. You learn a lot by being faithful, and
Hmm.
so a lot of us, and we have these relationships with students that we want to see continue, and so there is a good holy pull in that direction. But the other side could be true too.
Hmm.
You may not necessarily be unfit for leadership, but you might be the wrong fit for that church.
Yes.
And that is okay too. That doesn't mean that you're necessarily wrong for ministry as a whole. It's just not the right place. And so this is why having people that I believe it's really important to have community, but also community of people who are outside your current church,
Yeah.
who can speak honestly, unbiasedly, who can name the reality and say like, okay, this sounds like you're wanting to leave because it's getting too hard and you want to bail. You need to stick it out. Or
Yeah.
maybe the opposite, saying this is not healthy and there
Hmm.
are better places for you and this is not the right fit. Both things can be true and they can look very similar, but having people who can speak into those things is really, really, really important.
Couldn't agree more, man.
Yeah.
Uh, There's so many who get to that place and their first instinct is just to bail, and
Hmm.
absolutely they should stick it out. And but I mean, at the end of the day, it's ultimately just discerning, like, where is the Spirit moving in your life,
Yeah.
and where is God calling you to be, and is your season up in this particular space? And
Yeah.
that's not a bad thing, like, to be able to get to the end of it. And even in my context, we left very well.
Hmm.
We had a party and there was lots of tears, and they were genuine. We care very much for those people, and we still have conversations with several folks there. And my son was born there, and that's the only home he knew.
Yeah.
And so um, it's going to be a
Yeah.
special part of our story and our ministry for years and years to come. I get to do another wedding in 2 months for one of my former students there. So, like, there's going to be connection, and we're close, and it's a beautiful thing. And yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
you said that, yeah, like the idea of leaving well. This is the part where you're gonna, if you want to, I think spiritual maturity pays off in the long run,
Mhm.
especially in leadership. And even if where you're leaving from is unhealthy, it's not good. Leaving well and leaving honorably,
Yeah.
um, is so important. And if you do, there are gonna be times where you're unfairly targeted by
Yeah.
people who are behind, who have perceptions of you. I remember I was one of my old students from that church interned for me one summer, and we just got to talking, and she goes, "So why did you leave?" And I shared a little bit of that story. She goes, "I
Mhm.
had no idea." And I
Mhm.
said, "Yeah, because it was not my place to drag this church, your church, through the mud."
Exactly.
And so this is the thing that God calls us to as youth workers and spiritual leaders, is we're held to a standard to love the bride even when the bride isn't lovable,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
drag her name
Yeah.
through the mud. And we want that justice. We want that validation that says, look, they're doing things the wrong way. Yes, if there are sins that need to be brought out, they need to be brought out. But um, but leaving well is a huge part of, I think, healing. Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Well, and we have to remember that the churches that we're called to serve in for however long, it was a group of people's church way before you got there, and it will be a group of people's church long after you're gone.
Yeah.
And so it's important to remember, you know, God has called us to serve. Some people will serve the same one church their entire career, and it's a church they grew up in, and it's a beautiful story of just, one church is for you and you are for them, and it's a great thing. But many of us will serve many different churches and different seasons of our life, and we just have to remember that, is especially when we come from a different different place, different culture. It's going to be their church long after we're gone. And so be kind, be loving, be understanding that, you know, if you throw a grenade on your way out, you're taking some people out
Oh
with
my
you, and
gosh.
that's not okay. You do a lot of damage, and it becomes very hard for your church to not only find somebody good for them, they also now you're giving them a whole lot of trust issues because they're like, what
Yeah.
what if this person does the same thing and you hurt a lot? It's just not worth it,
Yeah.
It's not
And
worth that small, very, very small moment of satisfaction that you might receive. I
yeah.
mean, let's be completely honest. This isn't TV. This isn't a situation where you see in the TV where they're like, "You're fired." No, you can't fire me. I quit. And that
Yeah.
satisfaction, that's not real.
No, it's not real.
Even if you do experience a moment of elation from it, being able to, as you said, kind of the flip them off as you drive by, like, how's that going to make you feel with God? You're going to
Hmm.
immediately feel terrible about it. And, it's not healthy for you. It's not healthy for the church.
Well,
Leaving
and
well is important.
yeah, and I think as a youth pastor, so much of what we do is relational,
Hmm.
of letting go of the idea that the kids who you poured into might develop a connection with whoever comes after you is
Yeah.
also, that's huge. The summer after I left, a year later, I was at camp,
Hmm.
and it was the same camp as my old church, same
Wow.
week. And I remember one of the nights, the camp director, who I have a great relationship with, said, "Hey, we want you to find your youth pastor, and we want you to go and pray over that person."
Mm.
Now, I had gone from being a high school pastor to a middle school pastor, and if you know anything about middle school pastors, middle school schoolers, they don't get those moments. They don't
No.
understand that. And so here I am in the back of the room. None of my middle schoolers are aware enough to come and pray for me. And I'm hearing my old students pray over the new youth pastor.
Beautiful.
And I was broken. It was hard.
Yeah.
But that's the reality of again, you pour out yourself as a pastor, you pour yourself out. And there are times where that pouring out doesn't get refilled in the way that you want it
Yeah.
to. And this is where I think calling is so important. Your relationship with the Lord is so important, because we're not doing this because of what we might receive in terms of affirmation and accolades. We're doing this because of it's something we're compelled to do by Jesus.
Yeah, for sure. And gosh, man, and that would be just imagine
It
myself
was
like
just
sitting in the
awkward. It
back of the
was,
room, and you're seeing these people that you poured into for 2
yeah,
years,
yeah.
praying for somebody else, and you're just like,
Okay, it didn't matter at all.
yeah, like, well, and that's the other side of it too, is like, um, and every one of us has experienced this, like when they graduate and you see them in Walmart and they don't even acknowledge you, and you're
Oh
just
yeah, I've
like,
been there.
bro, 6 years of your life I poured
Uh-huh.
into you, and now you can't say hi. No, no, no,
Yeah,
no. And there's been a few times where I was like, oh no, you are not doing that.
it's not
And so
happening.
I, in a very joking manner, I was like, oh, you don't see me now? Am I invisible? Like, you just joke and have a good conversation about it. And but the other side of it too is understanding that, again, we're called to minister for a season, and you're not going to always be in your student's life, and that's good. Like, that's a
Hmm.
great thing, because they get to, if you get the blessing of being able to have them, um, you know, from middle school all the way through high school, and you get to see them graduate and move on to the next stage of their life, that's such a huge blessing,
Yeah.
and some of those students I still get to pour into. Others, actually, I'd say the vast majority, they move on, and
Hmm.
you get to watch from afar and pray for them, and it's a beautiful thing. But that's part of the hope that comes with it, is understanding that, I think ultimately it goes back to what you said, releasing your expectations,
Hmm.
for what you get to do and for how long you get to do it. So that leads me to my next question. I've totally thrown the script out, by the way.
It's all good. It's all
That's
good.
probably obvious. But I do want to hit on this question: is how does hope? We've talked a lot about hurt. We've talked about what hope and changing our expectations and reframing our mind in that. But in your experience, how does hope affect our ability to ultimately lead and help usher growth in our students and in our teams?
Yeah. So one, I think having a mindset when we encounter difficulty or obstacles, whether it's just a normal everyday church, mad parent or whatever, um, or is something big and heartbreaking and earth shattering, is asking the question of God, what do you want me to do with this? Meaning, how do you want me to change as a result of this? And I don't just mean like, okay, I need to get better with my receipts, or I need to get better at planning events or whatever, but really, like, what is seeing the hurts and these things as opportunities for God to shape and form me into the image of His Son. And we are not just here to do the work of the Spirit and to do the work of the Lord. God is forming us into His likeness, and so asking that question of, in the midst of all this, God, what are you doing in my heart that I need to learn? Now transforms that messed up, broken situation into an opportunity for God to form me more like Jesus. That lifts you out of the muck and mire to say that there's a possibility of something good to come out of this. Now, that good may not result in a new ministry job, or may not result in thousands of kids coming to Christ, but if the result is I'm more patient, I'm more kind, I'm more loving, versus more bitter, more frustrated, more angsty, then praise God, something good has happened out of that. Part of my story is a few years ago I got diagnosed with cancer, and so I had another rough season with that. Thank God I'm clean and everything's clear, but that was one of those things that rocked me to my core of like, God, why are you doing this to me? What, and the why question, like, God, why did this church hurt me? Or why did you let me go to this church if you knew that I was going to get hurt? It's not a productive question. A productive question to me is, God, what do you want me to do? How do you want me to respond? What are you forming in me as a result of this? And that has really, really helped me move past the pain, not in terms of getting over it, but it's turning that into something productive for my walk with Jesus. And I found that being honest with those hurts and being open with how God has healed you through those hurts leads you to a better place of leadership, because you treat people better. When you have opportunities to lead volunteers or even staff, if that's a part of it, or students, going through these hurts, if you heal from it, makes you more compassionate, makes you more patient, makes you more loving, and God uses that. And so, while I wouldn't wish that on anybody, and while I wouldn't say that someone commented like everybody needs to have a firing on their resume as a youth pastor.
I saw that. I was like,
I
don't know that I agree with that. Like, I understand the heart. Yeah.
Yes, like but for me, it's like it's gonna happen, even if you wish it or not. And so that moving of hope is, how do I transform what this world has broken into something God honoring? And that is the gospel, right? The gospel is God comes to us not while Jesus came to us not while we were loving or loved, but He loved us anyway and made something great out of it. And so there's something very core or central to the gospel in us being able to not cover up the brokenness, not pretend that it doesn't exist, not hide our feelings from it, but search to find Jesus in the midst of it.
That's huge, man. And I absolutely love. I've been writing down what you've been saying, partially for show notes, but also for my own personal notes. I love the reframing of the mind. There is, stop asking why. I mean, you didn't straight up say stop asking why. You articulated in a very kind and gentle way, which is beautiful. But ultimately, like, if I were to dumb it down, because you said it, so you articulated it beautifully, but is stop asking why and start healing, like start looking for how can I reframe this, like what can I do differently, how can I respond ultimately. Stop asking why and ask how can I respond and how can I find Jesus in this. And man, there's that changes everything.
Yeah.
It goes from, you know, ultimately looking at the negative to looking at what are the positives and how can I grow from this? How can I learn from this? And, to that person's comment, like everyone should go through a firing. I mean, yeah, there's some truth to that, because it's in those moments where we begin to realize, like, sometimes we need to be awakened, and I like to joke and say sometimes God needs to hit us with a spiritual 2x4 in the head,
Hmm.
like, because sometimes that's what it takes, but sometimes it's not necessarily something we're doing. And but even if we do experience hurt, can we find the good in it and finding ultimately the hope. So with that said, what are some practical steps or habits that you have experienced or you've seen that can help restore hope in youth pastors' lives when they've experienced that hurt?
Sure. I mean, I think counseling, mentoring, and community are huge parts of it. Um, Counseling, because learning how to process your emotions is such a huge, huge skill set for any human, but
Yeah.
also as you wrestle with other people's stuff, you have to learn how to understand your own emotions, and the counseling is huge with that. Mentoring is you need people who are going to stand by you through the thick and thin, who are going to tell you the truth and honestly say, yeah, that was kind of your fault, or
Yeah.
man, that was, that was not. So mentoring is huge. I have people in my life who are that I go to when I need it. I need that truth telling, and so that's really important. That's a role that I cherish, that I get to do. It's a space that people allow me in, and not just our staff, but I love helping other youth pastors figure that out too in the coaching sphere, but also community people who are going to love you whether or not you are on staff at a church, or who don't see you as the the pastor. They just love you for who you are.
Hmm.
Those are the support systems that you need, because the reality is when we have when we take on a role as a youth worker, we're not just signing up for a job. It's our place of worship. It's our place of community as well. And
Hmm.
when we lose that, it is a jarring, devastating situation, and we need those support systems for us to continue past when those hurts happen.
Hmm. Man, you sum that up so well. Um, it's like you've done this before.
It's like I've had this conversation before, for sure.
I love it.
Mostly to myself. Mostly to myself.
Hey,
That's
it's
right.
important though. And I think it's important to have good practical steps because, we talked about Doug Franklin. He said, or he says often, if you goals without practical action steps is a recipe for failure every single time.
Yeah.
Like, he really helped me see like the who, what, when, where, why, and how of everything you do. Truly allows you to have a more structured plan, and one in which you can succeed because you see all the things that go into it. And so I totally agree with you, having being able to work on the personal element with a counselor, and also having mentors that are willing to pour into you in a community that's going to love you, not for what you can provide for them, but because they just, I'm your friend, and that's it.
Hmm.
That's huge. You have to find that, and you're right. I mean, when you leave a community like that, it's so difficult sometimes to find that. And so having those friends that you can you can pour into, and I always like to throw this out there. If you are in that season and you don't have counseling or mentorship or community, please reach out to us. Please hit us up on social media or email us. If you don't have someone who is pouring into you, or a friend in general, please reach. I'm happy to be your friend.
Yeah, same here.
I'm definitely the guy that will randomly message you because you posted something encouraging and I thought it was awesome. And now I get to sit down with Kevin. So like, and I'm glad, please reach out to me, to Kevin, to any of our guys on our podcast. We want you to have community. The whole point of this
Yeah,
podcast is that every single person has a voice, and every single person should be able to be part of the conversation. And so if you're in a position where you go, it's real easy to say have mentorship and have counseling and have community, but I don't have that, and I feel very alone, because let's be honest, ministry can be very isolating.
yeah,
If you're in that position, please reach out. Don't wait. Don't think, well, they're just saying that to be nice. No, we're not just saying that. And I
yeah,
think I can speak for Kevin. We're not just saying that. Please reach out, because I think that's the hardest part. I've been in that position where I thought, man, I just don't want to waste somebody's time, or,
hmm
my problems are too small, or it's not. If
yeah.
you're experiencing something, your emotions, the things that you're feeling, it matters. And I understand the doubt that's associated with that and the insecurity that's associated with that. So please reach out.
Well, and I hope what I want my story to be is an open door for people to see that even in a place like me, where I work at a large church, I
Mhm.
understand that there are perceptions of that there's not the same problems, or you haven't gone through the same thing. I'm choosing vulnerability because I want other people to know that they're not the only one.
Yeah.
And so don't assume, just because someone's social media feed looks clean and good, that there's not some mess behind there. So
Yeah,
yeah, please reach out, because everyone's gone through uh, everyone's gone through it.
for sure. I'm glad you said that too, because there is that I would call it a bad adage of the grass is always greener on the other side, and
Hmm.
that's not always true. And
No.
just because it looks prettier, you have a huge youth group, doesn't necessarily mean that everything's healthy.
Yeah.
But it also doesn't mean that it's not healthy. Like, that's a
Yeah.
good thing, and rejoice in the successes of others, because at the end of the day, we're all in the same team. I don't
Hmm.
care what name is on your church. I don't care what denomination. As long as Jesus is at the center, when you
Amen.
win, we all win.
Amen.
And that's a beautiful thing. And so don't forget that we're all in this together. And that was one of the things I think we talked about earlier. I can't remember if it was in the conversation or our pre-talk. Like, I think that there's such a competition mindset in the church. And
Hmm.
it's understandable. We're all trying to do our best to win as many souls to Jesus as possible. But I don't care if that happened in my church or your church.
Yeah.
If people are accepting Christ, if people are being baptized, if people are ultimately serving their church and using their unique passions and calling to make their church a better place and to ultimately make Jesus's love known, amen. Awesome.
Amen.
Like, I'm so stoked to hear that. And
Yeah.
so, when my friend posts that they had 10 baptisms, I'm the first to go, let's go. Like, I'm so
Yes.
excited, because like, it's a win. It's
Yeah.
such a huge win. And so I think that's important to remember, that we're not competing with one another. We're working together. We're a team. And so let's succeed together. Let's help each other. In that. Um, Man, we could talk forever about this, but to
Yeah.
kind of to kind of wrap this thing up for today's episode, and man, I'd love to have you on another episode. I just feel like
Sure.
there's so many things we could talk about, and I would love to learn from you. Gosh, anyway, I'm gushing now. So let's. I just love conversation. This is why we do this. Like,
Yeah, I'd love
being
this
able to
too.
meet new people and to be encouraged and
Just
hear your story, man. I'm gonna have to go to Fort Worth and get lunch
do it.
with you at
I'll
some
buy
point,
you some barbecue. Come to Fort Worth, I'll
bro.
buy you
Let's
some barbecue.
go. Let's go.
I'll do it.
Um, I was like, my wife watches all of these, so you heard him. Okay, we're going to Fort Worth. All right. All
That's
right.
right.
Anyway, how do you address the doubt that often follows trauma and hurt?
Yeah. Um, so hearing the voice of Jesus, who says to his own son, as he's coming out of the waters, "This is my son with whom I'm well pleased." And I'm reminded that that affirmation that the Father gives the Son happened before Jesus did anything in his earthly ministry. Maybe it was before the wedding in Cana, or after that. But Jesus gets this affirmation from the Father, and we have to operate under a true assessment of our place as sons and daughters of Jesus and the Father. And that allows us to stop and think, my worth and value to God is not based on how many students show up, how many baptisms there are, how many kids are on fire for Jesus, how many, whatever the metric you or your church wants to use. Your value is not based on that. Your worth is based on being known and loved by the God of the universe. And when I have to remind myself daily that that's true. And so that is the starting point, in good seasons and in bad, because I didn't make this ministry grow. I have zero confidence that anything that I did affects the size of and scope of the ministry that I lead. It's Jesus. But at the same time, when registrations for camp are lower than what we want, or non-existent, or whatever you want to, that also, like, I can do things that affect that, but ultimately I can't affect, I can't. So that's the hard part about ministry, is we're doing something that we can't affect the spiritual growth of our kids. It's only Jesus, and we're just here to be faithful. Two, I come back to calling, right? Remind yourself what is true if God has called you to that. Now, I may have to manage my expectations on where and how and what, because the reality is not everybody gets to be paid in the same way, whether it's part-time or full-time, whether we desire it or not. I think reminding myself that getting paid full-time to do youth ministry is a very recent thing in the kingdom of God. Mm-hmm. So if I get frustrated that may not be how I earn my living, or how much I earn my living from, boy, let's go back to, what people who were called to ministry, what their roles were, even 100 years ago.
Yeah.
That helps me to get a little bit perspective. And two is another one, I think, for me, is just to get excited about what it is, go back to what you first fell in love with about student ministry. Yeah. I've been doing this I'm sure you're the same way. I'm still 20 years in ministry, standing in the back of the room, hearing kids worship. Man, it still gets me.
Yeah.
Getting to, make an awkward kid feel loved. Like, that still is exciting to me. And it's not something that I think, it's something you have to foster and stoke and keep the flame of that going, because then it's like, oh, I'm not doing it here, but I can do that somewhere, So yeah, keep that flame alive. You got to keep fanning that flame. Remind yourself why you got it into it in the first place. And I know for me, when I get frustrated about some decision that gets made by my church, or they're acting too slow or too fast or not communicating enough, I remind myself, like, 18-year-old me would have been pretty stoked that I'm still doing this, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think about the exact same thing, man. I remember being 13 years old, or even 12 years old, and God calling me to youth ministry, and thinking there's no way I can do that. And at 13 years old, I was like, there's no way. And I was very, very fortunate that I had, very blessed, really, that I had a youth pastor that was so in tune with God that when I explained this calling that I'd been running away from for a year, that he was so loving and kind, and he poured into me instantly, and gave me opportunities instantly, and I've been in ministry ever since. And it's it's one of those things that I was every facet early on in ministry was so cool to me. Like when I got to lead my first parent meeting, I'll never forget the first parent meeting I ever got to lead, and talking about all the things that we're going to do. And probably some of them were completely stupid, because I was blessed that God gave me an opportunity to serve at a very young age. And so I was essentially the face of our youth ministry at 16 years old.
Mm.
And looking back on it, some of the things that I said, "Hey, this is what we're gonna do." The fact that parents were so patient and loving and kind with me to say, "That's awesome, let's do it."
Yeah.
They probably should have smacked me in the face and said, "Kid, slow your roll." But they didn't, they
Yeah.
were very encouraging, and they sent me to all kinds of leadership um, things, and it was just every aspect of it was so fun for me. And that's one of the things I look back on and remind myself, like, when I'm having a really tough week or a frustrating week, and I show up to youth and have a conversation, and my entire mood changes, and I'm like, I look over, like, or I look in a mirror and I see myself smiling. I'm like, this is why I do what I do. This is why we go through the frustration. This is why we deal with that mom who brought you into the office because you or came into your office to complain because you know the event is too expensive, and
Yeah.
stop putting on expensive events because my kid wants to do all the things, and making me the bad parent because I have to say no. I'm like, well, you don't have to say no, we can fundraise. And they're like, see,
Yeah.
it's that right there. It's like that mentality of like, we can't even say no. And I was like, well, that's because we want to see kids experience, these students experience God's grace and love, and we're willing to move heaven and earth to make it happen. But it's those things. It's like, man, this is so fun, what we
Hmm.
get to do. And if you ever lose that sense, please reach out. and
Yeah.
and, and if you're not journaling, I guess that's another practical thing, is if you're not
Hmm.
journaling, please journal the good, the bad, and the ugly. But look back, and in those moments when you're like, you need reminding of why you do what you do, go read those journal pages. And I like to highlight, and so at the beginning on my page, if I know it's going, like, I'm weird and I color coordinate things. If I know that this is going to be a frustration, I highlight the title in red or the date in red.
Mm.
I can then go back in my pages and go specific. I don't have to necessarily read everything. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm
That's
frustrated.
interesting.
So I can actually go back in my pages and look for the blue highlighted dates, because those are the ones where God moved in my life. And I can go straight to him and go, whoa, I forgot about how many things God has done just in the last 6 weeks, 6 months,
Mm.
6 years. And all of a sudden it's like this highlight reel, like, man, God has done some incredible things. And I need reminding that God is using me, and that's it. That it's okay to be happy.
Yeah.
It's okay to,
Yeah.
like, it's okay to enjoy it. Like, put a smile on your face. Yes, there's some red pages, but you know what? You can't fully appreciate the blue pages without the red pages, is what I like to say. So,
Yeah. Well, and you know that this longevity means that you have more stories to draw from that
mhm,
fuel that. You have more relationships, so
mhm.
that when you are feeling like, oh, am I making a difference? You have, you have that one student who calls you up or says, hey, you don't remember, you may not remember me, or you may not remember this conversation, but it made a difference. That's what I think the blessing of longevity is. It allows you to draw
Yeah.
from that well more often.
hmm So stick with it.
Hmm. Hmm.
Man, thank you so much
This is
for
fun, man. This
for
is
for
fun.
doing this, for having this conversation. Like I said, I'd love to have you on again,
Sure.
talk different topics and stuff. But would also like to say, just to wrap things up, thank you so much, for you, the listener, for taking the time out of your busy day to allow us to hopefully pour into you, to encourage you, to offer a bit of hope, wherever you are, whether you're in a kind of a camp mountain high, or the valley low. You're seen, you are loved by the God, the creator and sustainer of the universe, and you are called to be where you are. And if you're not, then we pray blessings in
Mm.
whatever comes next. And so, gosh, thank you again for listening. We'd be so honored if you would share our podcast with your youth pastor friends on social media. You can tag a specific episode or just something that stood out to you using tag us in it, man. Tag us at Talk Student Men. Finally, if you want to be on the show, we say this all the time. This podcast is an open table, open invitation to the church. We want to sit down and talk to you about different things inside specific youth ministry, or it can be kids ministry, music ministry, whatever it might be. Whatever you're in, whatever your world is in, we have an open table, and we'd love for you to join us in the conversation. Reach out to us on social media. You can send us an email at podcast@studentministryconversation.org, and let's have you on. Let's have an episode, and let's talk about what God is doing in your life, and what you're passionate about, and all in the sense of just being able to encourage people just like you. So thank you so much again for being here. Thanks for being on the conversation and offering hope to youth pastors, and encouraging not just your team, but being willing to reach outside your walls and help people like me today, because it was definitely a blessing to hear how God has used you, and how you've found hope even in the midst of your broken situation, and God has been able to use you, and also just on a personal note, praise God for, I think I saw your post that you were 2 years cancer free.
Yeah, 2 years from cancer. Yeah,
dude, incredible! What an incredible blessing and story. I know you're definitely an encouragement to a lot of people, and so thank you for being willing to do that. So
it's my pleasure.
Until next time, have a great week, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode.